Good afternoon and welcome to our latest talk in the Impact Seminar series. My name is Liam Clear and I'm the Senior Manager for Research Analytics and Impact at UCD. And today's seminar is titled Assessing the Societal Impact of Research, Strategies in the EU and Beyond. I have great pleasure in welcoming our speaker today, Simon Kerridge. And Simon has been a research manager and administrator for over 30 years. He's an independent consultant and has previously been the Director of Research Services at the University of Ghent. Here, he was responsible for all aspects of research support, including pre-award, post-award, information, strategy, and governance. So in his presentation today, Simon will explore how research impact is assessed in different contexts, with a particular focus on the EU and Horizon Europe. The talk itself will last about 40 minutes, and at the end we'll have some questions and answers. So please feel free to add in some questions and answers into the button on the screen below, and you can enter them in as we go along, or indeed leave them to the end. So I will now hand you over to Simon for his talk. So thank you very much.
Great, thanks very much, Liam. First thing to do is try and work out the screen share. It all worked wonderfully in practice, and as long as I pick the one that isn't my email, then we should be all right. How does that look?
That's coming up now. Yep, it's there.
Fantastic. All I need to do now is find out how to advance the slides, because that's a separate screen. Okay, good, we're done. Fantastic. So welcome everybody. Yes, that is the plan of what I'm going to talk about, what I'm planning to cover. I'll probably throw in lots of acronyms. If anything doesn't make sense, stick it in the chat or something, and I'll try and address it straight away, or we can circle back to it. We've got plenty of time for questions at the end. I do have quite a lot of slides, and again, I've put those in potentially for reference, depending on what people want to go back and talk about. So I am not going to address every single bullet point on all of the 4,300 slides that I have. Yeah, not quite that many. Okay. So obviously I'm going to talk about myself, my favorite subject. Very teeny tiny number of slides on what is impact. Then we go on to why it's important and why it's important to funders, because after all, we all love funding, don't we? And focus a little bit on what they're looking for and how we can support that, either as individuals, as research impact officers, or as institutions. And yeah, we'll see how we go. So if you can't see me, I'm a bit fuzzy. This is what I actually look like in reality, rather handsome, if I do say so myself. As I say, lots of acronyms there, nothing I particularly want to pull out, but if anyone wants to talk acronyms later, then please do. I should mention the eArmor board, particularly as Dipti might be in the audience. So yes, I'm on the European Association of Research Managers board, but many other things, as you can see. And yes, I do like dogs. This is me pre-COVID beard. And for those of you who are old enough to remember, I know what you're thinking. Listen to that voice. This is what he sounds like. So, more dogs. Okay. So very quickly, just so we're all on the same page, what is impact? It is not impact factor. It is not anything to do with journals. It is change outside academia. And this slide, I think, says it very straightforwardly. We do research in universities or in research institutes or in companies or wherever it might be, but the effects of that research, what has come from that research, is felt outside. So this is the societal impact. Things can get better or things can reduce, and hopefully this is getting better. So reducing mortality rate or reducing stress or crime. How much stress am I feeling at the moment? I don't know. It's weird having an audience that you can't see. So yeah, impact can increase things or make things smaller, or indeed stop things happening at all. So stopping a particular thing from happening, like heritage loss, or potentially hair loss. Yes, I misread that. Yeah, okay, impact crater. So it's not dissemination. For the UK, in terms of the REF, which I'll cycle back a couple of times, it's not based on non-research activities. Otherwise, it's not research impact, it's just impact. Nothing to do with your number of citations, your visibility, or your reputation, although those might help impact happen, and certainly not measured by publication metrics or number of retweets. Okay, different stream bibliometrics I've just talked about, and impact measures. Impact measures can be quantitative or qualitative, and again, we'll talk about that later on. So yeah, anything outside, anything beyond academia. Impact can be anything: change in social welfare, production processes, saving the environment, reducing climate change, or indeed making people healthier and happier, and even more culturally aware. So yeah, quite often they're couched in terms of sustainable development goals these days, but they need not be. It's general improvement, although of course one man's improvement is another person's grimpact, the reverse of impact. If you improve a production process so things are more efficient, that's great for the company. They may not need as many staff, so not so great for employment. So there's always a counterbalance. You've probably seen this before. I'm just going to quickly explain it. Again, this is a REF diagram, and sorry, I'll try not to talk too much about REF. In the UK, the Research Excellence Framework addresses research, the quality of the research, and the reach and significance of the impact that has come from that research. In the 2014 exercise, there were 36 units of assessment, UOAs, basically subject areas. These first ones in sort of pinky are the health and medical ones, and the blue is natural sciences, and then you've got social sciences and arts and humanities. These are subdivided into smaller fields of research. So this might be chemistry, whereas in here you might have geochemistry. So, and then over here we have 60 different types of impact, which could be impact on education, impact on social policy, impact on law. And the importance of this diagram is that there are almost 4,000 different ways of a particular piece of research ending up affecting a particular impact area. So there is no one-to-one relationship to, if you're doing physics research, it's only going to have impact in astronomy, whatever it might be. This is the same diagram. So here's the 36 areas, and here's the 60 impact areas. And while there are certain clusters, so here you've got sort of the engineering and the physical sciences, which are having impact mainly in these areas here, which is to do with production and so on. You can see it's having impact in the medical sciences areas, in humanities and social sciences, social sciences and arts and humanities. So impact can happen from any research area into any impact area, or indeed any number of them. So don't try and think too narrow when you're thinking about that. So why do we assess impact at all? Well, this is a report from RAND. It's quite a nice short report. It's 8 pages, or if you read the full report, it's 200 pages. So decide on whether you want to read the executive version or not. They identify accountability, advocacy, analysis, allocation, acclaim, and adaptation. Some of these are a little bit twisted in order to get them to begin with A, but I'll explain. So accountability. How is our funding actually spent? Sorry, I'm just moving my Zoom controls there. Are the resources given to research being used effectively, and what's the outcome of them? Then advocacy, the importance of research, the impact that it has very much addresses the importance of research and potentially allows governments to think, well, this is a good thing, let's invest more. And then there's the analysis. How can we help impact happen better? What types of support is more effective than other sorts of support? Again, you can look back and see what has happened in the past and potentially enable you to support impact better in the future. Of course, all to do with the funding allocation. So particularly again in the UK, as part of the Research Excellence Framework, we have impact as part of that, and funding goes to institutions based on the quality, the reach and significance of those impact case studies. Yeah, and of course a claim, great impact reflects on the institution. That's the university where such and such happened. So again, it sort of raises that profile. And of course, then that adaptation, I talked about the analysis of, well, what sort of support worked well? Well, perhaps we want to adjust the support we have, or perhaps we want to adjust the areas in which we fund as a government, as a nation, because these areas are having more impact. Or of course, those areas aren't having enough impact, so they need more support. It can go either way. So from this same report, they interviewed, surveyed about 3,500 people, mainly researchers, research managers, administrators, and policymakers, and thinking about, where do you think things are going to go in the next 5 to 10 years? So we've got the kind of the now, and then the 5 to 10 years. So the first thing was talking about was, well, what forms of output do you produce? How many different forms of output? So the mean was 4.7. So somebody might journal articles, they might produce data sets, they might produce chapters of books, and another 1.7 things. Their impression in 5 to 10 years' time is that they will be producing more different types of outputs in order to potentially reach a wider audience. So maybe they would also write something for a professional association magazine, for example, to help that impact happen. What about changes in societal impact? Here it was a slightly different story, because some felt it would go more and some felt it would go less, but overall this sort of increase from 77% to 86%. Do you expect your research to have societal impact? More expected to do in the future. We'll come on to the reasons for that in the next couple of slides. So what about the research environment? How do you think that's going to change? So what sort of internal support might there be? And again, I've got a chart coming up, but overall, the drivers that we're about to see will be seen as being more important by those earlier in their career, because those are the ones that are going to affect them more. So if you can see the diagram and the numbers here, so what type of societal impact are you producing now and expect to produce over the next 5 to 10 years, then you can see that all of the different types of impact they're expecting to increase, well, apart from other, which goes down, but I guess that makes sense. So you can see sort of fairly big increase, 41% of respondents at the moment think they have research which has an impact on public engagement or awareness or perceptions. They feel that's going to go up to 55%. Going on to the drivers, which was the last slide I just talked about. So here we have, do you think these things are not important in the orange, somewhat important in the grey, and very important in the blue? What's the importance of these potential drivers on the change in the research environment? So quite high up would be the value placed on research by society, so that importance there. The actual largest one here is the importance of collaborating with other academic researchers, which to me is quite interesting. I would have thought that it might mean more to do with collaborating outside academia. Here we have the collaborating outside academia, and it's still fairly positive, but it's not as positive. Importance of collaborating globally, again, a very high one. Multidisciplinary research, research integrity, and here, changes in how research is assessed. And again, that's something that we might wish to discuss. So the factors which the participants in the survey thought would shape the research landscape is increase, as I say, and decrease on the emphasis of this factor, depending on the type of funding that was being talked about. Reducing pressures to produce a large number of research outputs. So perhaps things other than the Nature publication being valued, incentivization to produce a higher quality of new forms of output to engage a more diverse audience. So that harks back to the 4.7 types of different outputs up to the 6.5 types of different outputs which are expected. And the other things we've talked about, increasing collaborative research and making research accessible through open science, open access, increasing interdisciplinary research, and so on. How might this be achieved? Well, I say I didn't take part, I didn't run the survey. I'm trying to take credit for that, apologies. So what were the suggestions from the 3,300 people who responded to the survey? Well, funding to develop research that has societal impact, a fairly straightforward thing. They expect it would help creating research that has societal impact. But valuing the societal impact engagement within the higher education reward and recognition systems, and again, that's something that we might want to talk about, is having research impact as valued as having an article in Science or in Nature. Workload models to take into account the work to develop societal impact, so actually being given time to do this translational work, do the working with outside stakeholders. Changes to policy to address concerns about the culture of audit. And again, this is specifically to do with the UK and the EU, but you might have the flip side of that in Ireland, of course. Training to develop expertise in engagement, so societal impact and so on, so training to support academic staff, and changes to the academic publishing system to increase openness and to improve peer review. So here, talking about perhaps things like open peer review or preprints or post-publication review. And of course, we need fantastic infrastructure to enable all of these things to work robustly and trustedly and in a trusted manner. So the trends, just picking out from the bar chart thing that I listed before. So the top one was the need to collaborate, also the need to collaborate globally, focus on multidisciplinary research, research integrity, and this drive towards open science. So these are seen as being the top 5 drivers for the next 5 to 10 years. And again, it'd be interesting to see whether people agree with those. So those are the sort of the expected drivers, and one of them was a change to research assessment. So I am going to talk a little bit about the REF because it's one of my favourite subjects. Apologies for that. I was involved as a panel advisor for the latest exercise that's just finished in the UK. So here is the horrific story. I'm afraid I'll give the game away. Depending on the size of your submission, so if you had a department of 34 people, then you would have to produce 3 impact case studies to be assessed. If you had a department of 35 people, then you needed an additional case study, that 4th case study. And it was then the same for every 10 that you added on. So if we look back at the previous exercise, what I'm showing here is the graph of how many submissions were of a particular size. So did it end in a 0? So was it 10 to 11, 20, or 30, or 40? So, you know, what was it, the 0 at the end of the number? Or was it a 4 at the end of the number? So 14, 24, 34, and this is just below the threshold needed for an additional case study. From RE 2008, the previous exercise, there were no impact case studies, broadly sort of similar, maybe going down, perhaps there were fewer larger institutions than smaller institutions. If we superimpose the data from 2014, which is the first time this threshold was introduced for the impact case studies, the eagle-eyed amongst you might be able to notice that there are slightly more of those submissions just below the size needed for an additional case study compared with the number just over where an additional case study was needed. So that's about 5 times the amount. That's actually quite important in terms of research culture. For this exercise in 2014, staff could be selected for submission. If you were selected for submission, obviously that's a good thing for your career. If you weren't selected for submission, perhaps not such a good thing for your career because you're not deemed to be as research active or intensive as those submitted. So this here tells me that institutions were making strategic choices because of the impact case study requirement rather than perhaps treating all their staff in a good way. Now, of course, the good thing is that you can change systems. And so what happened was for the 2001, they changed the system. Everyone had to be submitted. I put the thresholds on again. The numbers are slightly different, but these are the thresholds. So up to 19, you needed 2 case studies. 20, you needed 3 case studies, all the way up to 34, and then for 35, you needed 4 case studies. And I don't know about you, but I'm seeing the same sort of chart here. And again, if I do it with the, again, it was 15 rather than 10 for each one. So here are the ones just over the threshold needed, and here are the ones just under the threshold needed. So again, 7 times more likely to have a submission just below that needed for an additional case study compared with that just passed. Bearing in mind that everybody who was eligible for submission, i.e. those on teaching and research contracts, were required to be submitted, apart from some very edge cases. The only way for someone not to be submitted was for them to be fired or for them to have their contract changed so that research was not part of their contract. I'm worried that this suggests that that's the sort of thing that might have happened. Not brilliant for research culture. Anyway, so there, that's how great the UK is. So on to impact now then. Hooray, I hear you all say. So think about intentional impact, of course, impact that's planned forward, but you also need some way of tracking things that happen. So don't ignore the potential serendipitous impact. The best thing to do is build impact in from the very start. And by the very start, I mean before your project starts, before your proposal goes in, include the stakeholders. And I don't just mean the beneficiaries, I mean all the potential stakeholders of what your impact, hoped for impact, might impinge upon. Get them involved at the very start, and we'll talk about that a bit more. Think about how you're going to track and evidence that impact. And of course, we're not just talking about dissemination and engagement, we're talking about actual change. I mean, if you write a blog post, well, that's great, but if nobody reads it, then you've had no impact. If lots of people read it, probably haven't had a great amount of impact. If they do something because they've read it, then that's when impact starts to happen. But how do you know what they've done? You need to think of ways of engaging and tracking that engagement. Quantitative indicators are, of course, good. Yes, the sales in the company went up. They sold 5 times as many aircraft as they did before your research intervention happened. But qualitative indicators can be very persuasive. Little sound bites, little testimonials, little quotes, always good to include. Always, to my mind, beware about ephemeral impact. Here's a company website that says it's fantastic, our sales have increased and all down to your research. You then need to write your impact case study for whatever reason, in the UK for the ref, but it could be for whatever reason for a project proposal, and they've changed their website. That doesn't exist anymore because actually, that didn't really matter to them. But you, of course, have an electronic copy of that website downloaded, PDF'd, and time-stamped. Yeah, I know you have. Okay, the ref lists 134 different types of impact. They are just suggestions, not exhaustive, but again, it's a really quite a useful document which indicates what potential impact areas might be and how those might be evidenced. Again, not exhaustive, but some good indicators. Okay, so how can impact be assessed? In the US, they have used STAR metrics, which is basically a collection of indicators in terms of economic growth, purchasing spend in and around institutions and so on. And they then sort of multiply that all together and come up with here is the impact of the institution as a whole, the research institution as a whole. And they assume that some of that is based on the research. Again, there are other approaches in the US in terms of project-by-project basis. So it's a federal reporter system. I don't know if you have had research fish inflicted on you in Ireland. I suspect so. And again, that can be used to track evidence of impact, but is perhaps not as robust as it might be. I've mentioned the Research Excellence Framework. I may mention it again. And then there are similar approaches, for example, in Australia, and I'll mention that. Just in case you're interested in looking at the ref impact case studies, practically all of them have been published. Here's a little explainer of how to work out from the impact profile, which are the best ones to look at, because there's no score for each individual case study, but each case study by a particular department. So the chemistry department in Ghent would have had 2 impact case studies, and if we scored 100% 4-star, you know they're both 4-star. But because of the complexities of there being a template as well as case studies, just a sort of a quick calculation. Again, I won't go through it, but if you're looking at the impact case study database, then again we can talk through that. Bearing in mind, impact case studies could score a half mark, so it's on a 4-point scale, 0 to 4, but we could have scored 3.5 or 3 or 2.5. For the 2021 exercise, which is just finished, impact was then worth 25% rather than 20% last time. And last time, the 20% was actually only 80% of that 20%, so 16% was impact case studies. So actually impact case studies have become a whole load more important this time. And I'll just check a couple of things in the chat. Okay, no, it's fine. Okay. Here we go. So pathways to impact, which was in the UK a separate document for Research Council funding for national federal funding, is now no longer a separate document. It's supposed to be woven into the proposal, just as it is for framework projects. I mentioned Ref 2014. The impact case studies are available online, and there's the link for it. I've got a slide later on. There's over 6,500 of them. Ref 2021 has just had its results submitted. The impact case studies are yet to be released, imminent, could even be this week. And again, it will be a searchable database of PDF documents with some metadata, and there'll be about 6,000 of those. This will be slightly easier to work out which ones are the best ones, because all of that 25%, which you'll see a star profile for, relates to the impact case studies in there. Timescales. Again, there was quite a lot of work post hoc done on the Ref 2014, but just to give you an idea, the case studies are based on underpinning research going back 15 years to have impact over the 7-year assessment period, and that then funds institutions for the next 7 years. So basically, research done in 1993, which underpinned impact happening in the 2008-2000 period for the previous exercise, is still funding institutions today. Their next funding will be informed by the 2021 exercise, which has just gone in. So for the next academic year, for 22-23, but that could have been based on research done in 2000, and they will continue receiving funding until probably 2028 based on that. So yeah, impact is a long-term game. Having said that, most of the case studies averaged research going back 3 to 7 years, not usually 15 years, mainly because it's difficult to show that evidence chain. Just a snapshot of the impact case study database, so you know where to find it, or when you find it, you know you're in the right place. You can do keyword searches, searching by underpinning subject area, and so on. And as I say, the 2021 database will be available soon. Some of them are really interesting reads, but mainly the ones I wrote, obviously. So yeah, okay, generating impact. So who will benefit? You know what the outcomes of the research are expected to be. You know why you're wanting to do it. As I've said before, engage with them before you start. And I really do mean before you start writing the proposal. That can be a bit scary for academic staff, but if you've got impact in mind to start, then what you will do is you will have the end users, the stakeholders there as part of the project, waiting to pull the results of your research into the impact, rather than you having to find them and push it on them. So it really just does make things a lot easier. Yeah. Do you have an impact support development team? I think I've seen a few names lying around, so make use of these people. So you do the research, impact happens, you gather the evidence. It's straightforward. I think I'll probably stop now. I think that'll be fine. So yeah, research is the simple part. Academic colleagues really know how to do research. Again, for the ref, the research has to be done at your institution rather than the member of academic staff. So with any future exercise that you may or may not be getting in Ireland based on the current consultation, then there might be particular rules which you need to be cognizant of. Think about the potential impact while doing the research and involve end users. I may have mentioned that already. It is a key thing, involve them. If you haven't involved them from the start, you can still bring them in halfway through, have dissemination workshops, or have a steering group, maybe have a panel of active users and so on. So just think about ways of engaging and enabling potential impact through those dissemination consultation routes. This is a common misconception is that the impact has to be done by the member of academic staff. Certainly UK rules, it does not have to be done. It's the impact that counts. If somebody else does that, a different person, a different company, different country, then it's fine. The important part is that the research has happened and you can show how that then led to the impact which other people are undoubtedly going to be involved in, and the original academics may not be at all. However, if they are involved, then you've got an into gathering that evidence of the impact. So again, it's quite often academics are involved in the case studies that you will probably see because it's just easier to generate those case studies. Okay, thinking about thinking about routes for your research to develop impact, thinking about getting your research noticed. If your users are involved in the research, then that's fine, but if not, how do you reach out to them? So thinking about wider dissemination, should you be publishing in professional journals as well as academic journals? So just think about that sort of dissemination routes, if you like. Also think about maybe media appearances, or maybe having a social media blog, or any kind of online presence, if you like, so get out there and be known. So again, that's ideal for some academic staff, others maybe not so much, but maybe a group, maybe at a department level, maybe at an institutional level. And again, this is the sort of thing that you can build into departmental or institutional support. So yeah, don't forget though, record this engagement. If you've got a blog post, have a discussion area and think about recording that, because that shows that people are engaged with and discussing or wanting to do something with your research, rather than just 20 people read my blog post. Did this change your perception of? If you've been to a UK museum recently, there's probably a thing at the end which says, did this change your perception of? Did this change the way you think about? In order to try and get feedback from whoever it was who curated that exhibition for, did this change the way you think about Roman families? Again, in order to try and capture that evidence of impact. Just different potential ways in which you might be able to help develop impact, and then thinking about the evidence recording afterwards. So recording, gather evidence, recording. It's an additional step. If you hadn't thought about it at the start, then you probably don't have the time or the resources to do it. If you have thought about it at the start, then you can build it into your project timescales and budget. Also, then, once you've gathered this evidence, you then have to write it in a way which is sensible. And by write, I don't necessarily mean write. It could be you make a little video about it, or whatever works best, or potentially write and make a video and do a press release. You have to sort of sell it, if you like. It's not a piece of academic work, it's a piece of sales work, really. So consider getting professional help, which you may have internally, but also just get other people to read it, see if they understand it, see if it grabs them, see if it's persuasive. So engage with stakeholders, think about sound bites as key messages. Translate documents into plain English. If it's something that you want people to read, don't leave it as an impenetrable academic article with an abstract, with lots of long words. Cold calling is never as good as engaging people from the start. Yeah, make sure that work is visible, but don't assume that if just because something is available means that anybody has actually read it. So you need to track, you need to cajole, and you need to monitor. I think I've covered all of those in my previous ramblings. So yeah, so consider social media, but also consider looking at theories of communication, and so look at communicating and developing. And again, there are some references coming up as to where you might read about that. So you need to gather the evidence of impact, tracking, thinking about how you're going to store this evidence. Do you have an institutional repository? Sure, but that's for articles. What about a repository for evidence about impact that might have happened? So think about that. Maybe that's something that's built into your research information management system, or could be. Don't think I need to go through examples of evidence, but just make sure they are as explicit as possible. Going back to the ref, there were some examples which said, yes, it was great research and we loved it, not this research was crucial to us having done this change. So try and make it as explicit as possible. So building impact from the start, engage academics from the start and engage stakeholders, build those networks and bridge the academic research support divide. And of course, that's what we're all here for now. So that's great. Of course, that, although it's summary, that wasn't my last slide. Maybe some things to think about. What does your impact currently look like? How can you build on that? What sort of partners and avenues do you have? And what impact do you want to see as a result of your work? So again, this can be a useful starting point for talking with and dealing with academic staff on individual projects. Nice diagram showing how co-design works. You can read all about it. That's David Phipps and Julie Bailey. Thinking about things to do going forward, there is an impact impact from the REF report from the 2014 exercise. There will be one from 2021, but it probably won't be out for 6 months or so. So this is currently the most up to date one. Yeah, and just consider how your work links with others. Lots of potential impact resources. You've got some really great support in-house and lots of great stuff on the impact toolkit side of things, but see some of these I think might be additional to that, so maybe take a look at those. Demonstrating impact, just a couple of tools that you might have heard of, you might want to consider. We use Vertigo Ventures at Ghent. We also use Grow Kudos. They're slightly different systems. Both have their advantages. Other systems are available. There's just the link for Vertigo Ventures. And it's basically a way of it will take a snapshot on PDF and date stamp a particular website, and then you can put that together and build an impact story case study, if you like. Yeah, levering impact. Once you've got your impact case studies, what are you going to do with them? Well, you can stick them on your website, which potentially will attract students if it's a particularly sexy one to do with maybe environmental change or something. Also useful for attracting staff because they're interested in going to places and working at places where research is having impact, again, particularly if it's their area. Also useful for attracting philanthropic funding as well. Again, some things are particularly sexy for philanthropists. If they're particularly interested in Roman history, then something to do with Roman history just might attract them. Yeah, and it then becomes a virtuous circle. So something else we've done at Ghent is little sort of mini websites about particular research projects, and there's kind of a 2-minute video and a 20-minute video of a kind of TED Talk type affair. Again, there's some examples there which you may or may not wish to look at. And yes, virtuous circle, as I've mentioned. So just a slight sort of shout out in terms of things that are happening in different areas, because different parts of the world, because again, this is something that might be coming your way. Maybe have a look at the biosketches for NIH. They talk about publications, of course, but they also talk about the outputs of the research, so the impact that it has had. They have a particular initiative in the US called Broader Impacts, and Broader Impacts is even broader than the REF Broader Impacts, because that includes things like has your work promoted full participation by women or people with disabilities or underrepresented minorities in STEM, for example. So, and that can be entirely sort of reflexive and something which is not necessarily the main part of your research, but something that you have done as part of your research. And again, have a look at the ARIS website for that. There is some really nice guiding principles there. That's actually quite a nice short document, just a 4-pager. So again, some nice bullet points there, which are always worth reviewing. In the UK, Royal Society, one of the oldest funders, also talks about, well, as a researcher, don't just tell us about your research, but tell us about how you have maybe had efforts to advise policymakers or whatever it might be. So these sort of societal impact things are coming into the fore in terms of what funders want to see as part of your track record. I think I've gone through the concluding remarks. This is probably the 4th slide on concluding remarks. I think I want to jump to Excellence in Research Australia. They are currently reviewing their current national research assessment system and looking at how to assess research impact. So this is the impact and engagement. So should be rigorously assessed, should provide a rich and robust source of information on the strategies for support, but also demonstrating that success. So provide evidence that the universities are undertaking research with, and also to enable comparison. So as part of that recommendation, it then says for the next excellence in research assessment exercise, that for each unit of assessment, each field of research, maybe 3 to 5 case studies. They currently had 1 case study last time. So again, that is becoming more important. I've got some slides which I'm probably not going to go over now on an example of support structures. This is from the University of Ghent, so I just flip through them because I see them just about out of time, but it's based on having a policy which is aligned, or rather building an impact policy aligned with your overall policy, includes impact literacy, focusing on people, so having a central support of impact professionals who are there and funded centrally, and then also having various platforms. So here we're talking about external platforms, so partnership platforms, and here we are talking about internal platforms. So they have an in-house system, Gizmo, great acronym, and they also use altmetric, recording all sorts of outputs and then linking those to impact. And yes, so the lessons from Ghent are co-create a policy and infrastructure, have a group effort. So don't necessarily assess impact at individual level, but assess it at group level, because not all research can have impact. Not all researchers are going to be great at doing impact, but on a group level, you probably should be. Build those long-term relationships. And yes, it's not a straightforward job, so it does need central support. Just to let you know, if you're dealing with a UK institution, an impact case study from a UK institution submitted to the REF is going to be worth, over the next 7 years, about 300 to 400,000 euros to that institution in terms of block grant funding. Kent submitted 70 impact case studies, so you can see the sort of funding that will be going to the institution, about 20 million euros over the next 7 years based on impact. So that's why we invest a lot in UK universities in impact. Size matters. So here we have the bigger institutions, which always do pretty well, 65%. Some of the smaller institutions get 100% 4-star in impact, but also some of them don't do very well. So there is kind of a critical mass here about which case all of your impact is going to be pretty good. I've got some specific advice for framework projects. And again, I'm going to flip through this unless we want to come back to it. Yes, the presentation will be shared at the end. Sorry, I've been trying to spot the chat, so sorry about that. So this is pretty much reflecting what I've already said, but has some sort of just a couple of specifics for framework. But I guess the biggest takeaway from here is the sustainability of what happens to your project afterwards. How are you going to show that the impact might continue? So this is me. Takeaway messages are you need to have an infrastructure at your institution, but also nationally and hopefully internationally, to gather all these bits of information together. Everything needs to be open or as open as possible. You want to have some sort of semi-automated data collection. If someone is using your research, if they cite it, that's fine. You can find out about that. But you need to look at the grey literature citations as well. So things like altmetric. But also, if people are tweeting about your research, do you have methods of collecting that? If someone's tweeting about your research, maybe they're interested in talking to you about the impact your research might have. Develop these impact stories, of course, in the UK for the ref, but we have them for other purposes as well, and they may well be useful for you. And of course, you might be required to have them in the future. Maybe have a look at the reward and recognition framework in the Netherlands. I really like this framework because it does reward academic staff for everything that they do, not just their research output. However, I had to say all this about 7 years ago, and it still has yet to come to fruition. So who knows where we'll get to? And that is my last slide. And I went slightly over time. And apologies, Liam.
No apologies necessary, Simon. Thank you very much for that very insightful and interesting talk. And I think you really very successfully captured all those ways that people have for assessing societal impact. And I think it's very much given us a lot of food for thought and to how we consider our own impacts and assessments. So I think we have a few minutes for questions and answers now, and I think there are maybe some questions already logged below. So we might just cover off a few questions in the time that we have left, if that's okay, Simon.
Yep. Only easy questions, please, though.
Okay. I think I want to hear from Peter Scott, and he asks, on the whole, do you think that REF has had an overall positive impact on research in the UK? And do you consider that the flaws in REF can be fixed, or can you only really swap problems or make trade-offs?
So the answer is yes and no, of course. So yeah, there have been studies. I mean, the REF first started off as the RAE in 1986. There was a kind of predecessor thing in 1983. And there are good correlations between the introduction of the REF and the rise of the UK in terms of the various, I hate to say it, but league tables for institutions, but also country league tables in terms of citation share and things like that. So I think that it was very much if you count it, it becomes important. So counting research meant that people put more effort into it, and we're doing it more professionally, if you like. And that was not quite aligned with the start of the profession of research management, but certainly there is a large cohort of professional research managers who are there to help academic staff make the best of their research, get more funding, and so on. So I think that there is quite a reasonable correlation, and many would argue a causation. Every time we have an assessment afterwards, it is a kind of, well, but are we at diminishing returns now? A lot of money is spent on the REF, in the order of 250 million. On the other hand, it distributes, I should be able to do the calculation in my head, about 10 billion. So in terms of percentage cost, it's lower than the Research Council transaction cost for funding research. So from that point of view, it's useful for allocation of funding, and it's useful for institutions to keep their eye on the ball. Could it be done in a lighter touch way? Probably. Who's the people who complain most about it? All the academic staff who are having to produce stuff. Who's the people who make the rules? The academic staff on the panels, because they really want to do everything as well and as properly. So the thing that always amazes me is the amount of work that the panel members get through, because they want to be as fair as possible and do the best for everyone. So it's a bit of a catch-22 situation there. But yeah, so can the flaws be fixed? Well, I guess they're tweaked. I guess I'm a bit worried about the impact case study threshold issue. So I'll be very interested to see the post hoc analyses on that. To me, it looks like the situation got worse. And that's because the stakes are so high, but the stakes for individuals are even higher, particularly if their contracts have been changed. So I don't know if we'll be able to delve into that. Can you swap problems and make trade-offs? I think that's always the problem, is that you change something here and there is an unexpected consequence over there. So it's the least worst solution. I think that's what they say about capitalism, isn't it? Or democracy? Well, probably both.
Very good, very good. Yeah, I think we've a few more kind of ref-themed questions in there as well, and I think there's one on extra workload and on the workload of academics generally. So do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, so that 250 million estimate includes a fairly large chunk of staff time cost. So yeah, I mean, there are those involved in working on the panels for about 800 academic staff on the panels. It's not a full-time job for a year, but there's you've got to read about 600 maybe outputs and case studies and so on. So it's quite intensive. So there's that. Then there is the work to do for submission. For publications, it's not so bad. You write the publications, which are your best ones, persuade the person doing the submitting, head of department, those are your best ones. The impact case studies really are onerous to get done well. And I'd like to think that at Ghent we reward them well. But I suspect we probably don't reward them as well as they should be rewarded. An impact case study can mean that you need to do an extra 3 months research to gather the evidence for here's the impact that it actually had. Would we give them the time for that? Yes, probably. Would they get promoted if they got two papers in Science and Nature? Probably. Would they get promoted if they have a 1 4-star impact case study? Maybe not. Financially, the impact case study is worth a lot more than those papers in Science and Nature. So it's that reward and recognition and trying to pull those things together. For those particular academics involved in the selection process, there's a lot of work. So yeah, I suppose it's maybe good training for becoming head of department or something like that. Let's try and put a positive spin on it. Sorry.
Very good. I've noticed we have a few questions coming in on the chat as well, and I'm just wondering maybe if we should cover off a few of those as well. There's a question there about how do you see the impact agenda evolving in the European research and innovation arena over the coming years?
Okay, well, that's a small question, isn't it? Thanks, Chiara.
I knew you'd like that one.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yes. So, impact is critical to all of the framework projects. It's also something which is sort of bubbling under in the various other instruments that there are. But do I see, for example, there being a translational research chunk, the kind of the equivalent of the Bright URAM program from 1980 something probably. I guess those different instruments are there. We've got sort of the equivalent of what were technology platforms and so on. So I'm not sure that I see too much change. I think there is. I think impact is just everywhere, and I think that's probably how it should be. I'm not sure if Chiara has a different view on that. That'd be interesting.
Okay. Yeah, I think there's also a lot of questions around the extra workload, but also in there's some nice guidance there given by Giovanna Lima as well. And so let's see, do we have any other new questions there? Yeah, there's a question there, and it's about is anybody tracking the impacts, or does everything fall into the hands of the PI to be reviewed? But I think there is quite a, from what I gather anyway, there's quite an almost industry around tracking impacts, and I think your slides have really evidenced that in terms of the type of analysis that people do on the case studies. But I think, anyway you look at it, it probably does look at a lot of PI involvement, a lot of researcher involvement, both in the production of and the reviewing of ref case studies.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's kind of like a case-by-case basis. I mean, and it depends on institution to institution. And say, Kent, we have their sort of central impact office with three sort of staff in there. Their role is mainly to put the case studies together and help advise on collection of evidence, if you like. Often the academic is best placed, at least for that sort of initial gathering of evidence, but quite often they might have some local support in the department to actually do the legwork for that. Or as I say, I mentioned the kind of, well, you need to do an extra 3 months work to collect that evidence. That's something that the institution would fund centrally, because if you consider 3 months of a research assistant's time compared to 300,000 euros, if we don't pay our staff that much, then that trade-off is really worth it. But identifying those case studies that it's worth doing for is problematic. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Having that sort of central repository and the tools I mentioned that we use, Vertigo Ventures and Grow Kudos, then those are things which the academics can use and or can be supported by, because they can be collaborative tools. Definitely worth looking at that.
Yeah, just on the Vertigo Ventures as well, we are looking at to our own research management system too, and it has some new features that we're looking at rolling out that help to capture the evidence for impact as well. So we'd hope to be able to release that later on this year. But
exciting.
Yeah, no, yeah, I think we'll probably have a look at Vertigo Ventures and Kudos again though, because I think they have a very unique tool set as well. So we have another question there from Sarah Bowman as well, and so she's thanking you for your talk, and she's wondering if you know who is assessing the REF database. We see the development of REF case studies in the UK context, but are these then being translated for a range of audiences in different variety of formats?
Wow. Okay. Interesting. Okay, there's a few questions there. I'll see what I can do. There will be a contract for doing the equivalent report that I talked about. I don't know if it's already been given or not, but it would probably go to sort of King's College or Rand or someone like that to produce the sort of equivalent report of, X% of case studies involved this sort of thing. And then some lovely diagrams from that as well. In terms of the sort of different forms of output, there is, as far as I know, no national initiative to do that, but I know a number of institutions, including Kent, are saying, well, look, we like these case studies, and we've taken 10 and said these are the ones that we think are particularly interesting, and making the 2-minute video and the 10-minute sort of TED Talk type thing to go alongside the case study. Most institutions will be doing something, probably rewriting the case study so that it doesn't have the horrible structure that it needs to have for the assessment to make them more accessible. If you look at probably any UK institutional website, the 2014 case studies, or at least a subset of them, will be available there, with lovely pictures and little videos attached. And pictures are not something that you would normally have in the actual REF case study submission. In terms of any overseas analysis, I don't know. That would be interesting. Very interesting.
Very good, very good. So, very good. I think I might have even called out that last question wrong. So I think Sarah has done a clarification on that one.
All right.
Yeah. So what else? Peter wants to know: are the costs for monitoring and delivering impact included in the UK research grants?
If you apply for it, yes.
Okay.
But the problem is it has to be done in the lifetime of the project. So it's the same as the problem for open access funds. If you have something published a year later, well, your project's finished, which is why we now get a block grant for open access publication. If your impact is happening during, then absolutely, and that's something that is probably means you're more likely to get funding because you're doing things during the project, which means it's more likely to have impact, which of course is what the funders want. But it's kind of built into the UK system because if you submitted impact case studies last time, you'll be getting this 300,000 roughly for the next 7 years per case study, but that's not for the case study. It's unhypothecated money which you can use for anything, and most institutions will be spending at least a proportion of that on supporting the next cohort of case studies.
Okay, very good, very good. We have another question there, and it's to do with the things like the number of website podcasts, etc. views. Are they considered impacts in your opinion?
So with my UK ref hat on, no.
Nope.
A view is not, but it is something that might help tip the balance in terms of did this thing lead to that thing? So you could potentially say, well, a view is impact because if 1 million people viewed it, that means 1 million people have spent 20 seconds on it, and you could try and sort of do some kind of, well, that's I can't even think of the phrase now. Opportunity cost. So you could associate an opportunity cost with that, but it's not really going to impress the panels. If, on the other hand, which was a case study from last time, of those 1 million views of the David Attenborough documentary on the Blue Earth, Blue Planet, resulted in lots of visits to the website, which then resulted in 20,000 people signing up to do the MOOC on learning about the planet, then that's impact. Because people spending time doing, learning something is a change for what they would have done before. So
and I think Leanne also wants to know, if there is any way of recording how a podcast may have affected listeners. Is there any methodology or any way of doing that?
Yeah, it's feedback basically. So if you've got a podcast, maybe there's a website to go with that, and you can have a comment section or so on. But the easiest way, it's not that easy, is to ask people to fill in a survey, as short as possible, but asking the questions you need to ask, which is, did this make you think differently about X, or have you done something else? And gathering that. And if you've got 20,000 people listen to your podcast, and you get a survey and 400 people respond, that's probably statistically significant. And you can say that based on that, on average, blah 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 blah. And yes, that has changed the perception of. So it's trying to gather that additional data, but you do have to work for it.
Yeah, very much so. I think there's no easy way to capture these types of.
No, it's no easy way to do research either, but
no. Doesn't stop people though.
No.
Thankfully. Yeah. I think we've probably covered most of the questions as far as I can see at this stage, unless there are any other burning questions that people might have. I don't see anything coming in, so I might just kind of wrap up the session then, and to say thank you very much for everybody who attended today, and for all your questions and comments and advice through the chat and the questions and answers. So thanks everybody for that. I'd also like to thank Simon again for his wonderful talk, and for David Bennett, my colleague, who's organized the session today. And finally, I'd just like to say, well, I hope you'll all join us again for maybe one of our upcoming sessions in the future. And I suppose until then, we will say goodbye and thank you very much.